Stop what you're doing. Put 2 fingers on the bottom of your rib cage right where the ribs flare out, just above your stomach. Now take 1 slow, deep breath. Feel that? Feel how your ribs expand? Now here's the experiment. Do it again, but this time, pay attention to which side moves more. Your left side or your right side. Most people, for the first time in their entire life, just notice something their body has been hiding from them since the day they were born. One side of your rib cage doesn't move the way the other one does. It's not your imagination. It's not bad breathing technique. It's not something you did wrong. It's something you were built with a structural asymmetry, sitting quietly inside your chest, shaping the way you breathe, the way your heart beats, the way blood reaches your brain, and according to a growing body of research, the way you age. And once you understand why this happens, you will never look at your own chest the same way again. Because this isn't really a story about ribs. This is a story about your heart, your nervous system, your memory, and how one skeletal decision your body made before you were even born is still quietly running the show today. Welcome back to Feynman Explore, the channel where we take the parts of your body you've never thought twice about and show you they're the reason everything else works. If that sounds like your kind of rabbit hole, you're exactly where you need to be. Now let's go back to that breath you just took. Here's the first question that should be bothering you right now. Why would evolution, a process that spends millions of years perfecting symmetry, from your eyes to your hands to your lungs, leave your ribcage lopsided? Because make no mistake, this isn't a minor detail. Look at an X-ray of the human chest and you'll see it immediately. The ribs on the right side sit slightly higher and are angled differently than the ribs on the left. The diaphragm, the giant dome-shaped muscle underneath your lungs, isn't level either. The right side of it sits noticeably higher than the left. If you designed a machine, you would never build it this way. You'd make it mirror itself perfectly, left and right, for balance and efficiency. But your body isn't a machine built from a blueprint. It's a machine built around compromise. And somewhere inside your chest, one specific organ demanded so much space that your entire skeleton had to bend around it. What you just felt in your ribs a moment ago wasn't a flaw. It was a 9-month-old negotiation between your bones and your heart won. Here's where it gets interesting. Your heart is not centered in your chest. Most people assume it sits directly in the middle, right behind the sternum. It doesn't. About 2/3 of your heart's mass sits to the left of your body's midline, tilted at an angle, with its pointed tip, the apex, aiming down and to the left, toward roughly the 5th space between your ribs. This isn't random. It happened in the womb, roughly 3 weeks after conception, during a process called cardiac looping, one of the strangest and most delicate events in all of human development. At that stage, your heart isn't a heart yet. It's a straight tube of cells, pulsing rhythmically, pumping fluid before it even has valves or chambers. And then, almost impossibly, that tube begins to fold. It loops to the right, then bends, then rotates, twisting itself into the 4-chambered asymmetrical shape that will beat inside you for the next 80, 90, 100 years. If that loop goes in the wrong direction, a condition called dextrocardia, the heart ends up mirrored on the right side of the chest instead of the left. It's rare, but it proves something important. The position of your heart is not accidental. It's the result of a genetically programmed twist that determines the architecture of everything around it. And once the heart claims that space on the left, everything nearby has to accommodate it. The left lung is smaller than the right lung, with a notch carved out of it, literally called the cardiac notch, just to make room. The diaphragm dips lower on the left to cradle the heart's shape. And the rib cage, which forms around the organs during fetal development, like a fence being built around whatever's already growing inside the garden, shapes itself asymmetrically to protect that off-center heart. This is what most people miss. Your skeleton is not a rigid cage your organs sit inside. It's a structure that grew in direct response to your organs. The ribs didn't come first. The heart did. So when you felt one side of your rib cage move differently than the other, you were feeling the physical echo of a decision made when you were smaller than a grain of rice, a decision that permanently altered your left lung capacity, your diaphragm mechanics, and the entire geometry of your breathing for the rest of your life. But that's not the strange part. The strange part is what this asymmetry is still doing to you, every single second, without you noticing. Here's the real question. If your ribs are asymmetrical, and your diaphragm is asymmetrical, does that mean your breathing itself is subtly imbalanced every single breath, thousands of times a day? for your entire life? And if it is, does that imbalance actually matter? Or is it just a quirky anatomical footnote, the kind of thing you mention at a dinner party and everyone forgets by dessert? Here's what should unsettle you. It matters enormously, because breathing isn't just about oxygen. Breathing is a mechanical pump, and that pump is wired directly into the nerve that controls your heart rate, your digestion, and according to newer research, your mood, your memory, and how fast your brain ages. That nerve has a name. And once you understand what it does, you'll realize your ribs were never really about your lungs at all. This is where everything changes. Running down from your brainstem, threading past your throat, alongside your heart, wrapping around your lungs, and diving down into your gut, is the longest cranial nerve in your entire body, the vagus nerve. For decades, scientists treated the vagus nerve as background wiring, the nerve that quietly kept your organs on autopilot. But that view has collapsed over the last 20 years. Researchers now understand the vagus nerve as the primary communication cable of your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest, digest, and repair, half of your nervous system that counteracts stress. Here's the part almost nobody knows. The vagus nerve is mechanically sensitive. It has receptors that respond to stretch, pressure, and movement in the chest cavity, particularly around the diaphragm and the base of the lungs. Which means every time your diaphragm moves, every single breath, it is physically massaging the vagus nerve. Now remember what you learned 2 minutes ago. Your diaphragm doesn't move symmetrically. The right side, sitting higher and pressing against the liver, moves differently than the left side, curved around the heart. That means the mechanical signal your vagus nerve receives with every breath is not a clean, symmetrical pulse. It's lopsided, just like your ribs. And here's why that matters more than almost anything else in this video. The vagus nerve is the primary regulator of your heart rate variability, the tiny, healthy fluctuations in the time between each heartbeat. Contrary to what most people assume, a perfectly steady heartbeat isn't a sign of a healthy heart. It's often the opposite. High heart rate variability, meaning your heartbeat intervals shift slightly and adaptably from moment to moment, is one of the strongest known biomarkers of cardiovascular resilience, stress recovery, and even longevity. Low variability, a heart that beats too rigidly and mechanically, is associated with higher risk of cardiac events, chronic inflammation, and faster biological aging. And the vagus nerve stimulated with every breath your ribs and diaphragm take is the dial controlling that variability in real time. This is why deep, slow breathing lowers your heart rate almost instantly. This is why a long exhale can calm a racing pulse faster than almost anything else you can do voluntarily. You're not just relaxing. You are mechanically tugging on a nerve that runs from your brainstem to your heart, using the asymmetrical bellows of your own ribcage as the lever. Scientists originally believed the vagus nerve simply reacted to what the heart and lungs were doing. Now we understand something stranger. The vagus nerve is a two-way highway. It doesn't just receive signals from your organs, it sends signals back up to your brain, shaping your emotional state, your stress response, even your memory consolidation during sleep. Somewhere between 80 and 90% of vagus nerve fibers carry information upward, from body to brain, not downward. Which means the asymmetrical breath you take every 4 seconds isn't just feeding your blood with oxygen. It's quietly feeding your brain with information about your own physiological state, shaping, in small but constant ways, how safe, how calm, or how threatened your nervous system believes you are. But even this isn't the deepest layer. Because there's a second structure hiding at the very top of that same ribcage, one most people have never even heard of, and it might be silently choking off blood flow to your brain right now. Here's something almost nobody thinks about. Your ribs don't just protect your heart and lungs. The very first rib, the smallest, most overlooked bone in your entire skeleton, sits at the base of your neck, right where your arm meets your torso. And squeezed through the narrow gap above that rib is a cluster of the most important wiring in your upper body. The nerves that control your hand and arm, and the major blood vessels carrying blood to and from your brain. The real question is, what happens when that space gets too tight? The next mechanism is even more surprising. That narrow passageway at the top of your ribcage is called the thoracic outlet, and it is, without exaggeration, one of the tightest, most crowded anatomical spaces in the entire human body. Through this small triangular gap, past the brachial plexus nerves, the subclavian artery, and the subclavian vein, the vessels responsible for moving blood between your heart, your arms, and, critically, contributing to circulation that ultimately reaches your brain. Here's what most people never realize. Modern posture is quietly narrowing that gap for millions of people. Forward head posture, rounded, slumped shoulders, hours spent hunched over a phone or a keyboard. Every one of these habits pulls the collarbone downward and backward, compressing the thoracic outlet, squeezing the very nerves and vessels threading through it. When that compression happens, doctors call it thoracic outlet syndrome, and its symptoms read like a checklist of modern complaints that most people never connect to their posture. Numbness or tingling in the hands, cold fingers, weak grip strength, aching across the shoulders and neck, and in more advanced cases, measurable reductions in blood flow through the subclavian artery itself. Now connect this back to the asymmetry you discovered at the very beginning of this video. Because the first rib on your dominant side for most people, the right tends to sit slightly higher and is pulled on by different muscles than the left, thanks to years of asymmetrical arm use, asymmetrical carrying, asymmetrical posture. Combine that with the natural skeletal asymmetry left behind by your off-center heart, and you get a thoracic outlet that is frequently more compressed on one side than the other. This is where the story stops being about comfort and starts being about survival. Reduced blood flow through the subclavian artery doesn't just affect your arm. The subclavian artery is directly connected to the vertebral artery, one of the four major arteries supplying blood to your brain. Chronic postural compression at the thoracic outlet has been linked in clinical literature to reduced cerebral blood flow, brain fog, fatigue, and, in some documented cases, contributed to dizziness and even stroke-like symptoms when compression became severe enough to trigger blood clot formation. Let that sink in for a moment. The direction your ribs quietly abandoned the subtle asymmetry you felt in the first 10 seconds of this video is mechanically linked to a bottleneck of vessels that helps supply your brain with blood. This organ is not what most people think it is. Your rib cage isn't just a bony shield. It is a dynamic, load-bearing structure that directly influences how much blood reaches your brain, how efficiently your heart regulates itself, and how your nervous system interprets safety versus threat every single day with every single breath for your entire life. And it doesn't stop there. The body uses this structure for something much bigger than breathing. It uses it as a foundation for aging itself. Here is where the smallest asymmetry in your rib cage becomes one of the largest predictors of how gracefully or how painfully you grow old. Unlike most people assume, your ribs are not rigid, dead bone your entire life. In youth, the cartilage connecting your ribs to your sternum is soft and pliable, allowing your chest to expand generously with every breath. But starting in your 30s and accelerating through your 50s and 60s, that cartilage gradually calcifies, hardens, becoming more bone-like and less flexible. This means the natural asymmetry you were born with doesn't stay the same. It compounds. Whichever side was already moving less efficiently in your 20s becomes stiffer, more restricted, and less mobile by the time you reach your 60s and 70s, a process researchers refer to as declining chest wall compliance. And here's why that terrifies pulmonologists. Reduced chest wall compliance is one of the quiet, underappreciated contributors to the drop in lung capacity we associate with normal aging. Total lung capacity can decline by roughly 20 to 30% between early adulthood and old age, and a meaningful portion of that isn't due to the lungs themselves weakening, but the rib cage around them losing its ability to expand. Less lung expansion means less oxygen exchange with every breath. Less oxygen exchange means your blood carries slightly less fuel to every organ in your body, including the organ that consumes more oxygen pound for pound than any other tissue you own, your brain. Remember, vagal tone. How strongly and adaptively your vagus nerve fires depends partly on the mechanical movement of your diaphragm and rib cage. As chest wall compliance declines with age, that mechanical stimulation weakens. Multiple studies tracking heart rate variability across the human lifespan show a consistent, well-documented decline in vagal tone with age, and that decline has been associated in longitudinal research with increased inflammation, elevated cardiovascular risk, and even correlated cognitive decline in some aging populations. This is the mechanism most people never connect. A rib cage that's been slowly stiffening since your 30s, compounding an asymmetry you were born with, gradually reduces the mechanical stimulation of a nerve that helps regulate inflammation throughout your entire body and chronic, low-grade inflammation is now considered one of the central drivers behind Alzheimer's disease, cardiovascular disease, and the broad biological process researchers simply call inflammaging. Every hour spent slouched forward over a desk, a phone, a steering wheel doesn't just round your shoulders. It compresses the thoracic outlet further, restricts diaphragm excursion further, and biases your already asymmetrical ribcage even further toward its weaker side. You are, quite literally, training your skeleton every single day through thousands of small, unconscious postural choices to breathe less efficiently, stimulate your vagus nerve less effectively, and deliver marginally less blood to your brain than you otherwise could. None of this happens dramatically. There's no single moment where you'll notice it. It's not a heart attack. It's not a stroke. It is a slow, compounding tax paid quietly, invisibly, breath after breath, year after year, and the interest on that tax is levied against your cardiovascular system, your cognitive sharpness, and ultimately, how many healthy years you get to live inside a functioning brain and a resilient heart. This is why doctors specializing in longevity increasingly emphasize something that sounds almost too simple to matter: ribcage mobility, diaphragmatic breathing, and postural alignment. Not because they're trendy wellness buzzwords, but because underneath the marketing language sits real, measurable physiology. Improving thoracic mobility and breathing mechanics has been shown in clinical research to meaningfully improve heart rate variability, reduce resting sympathetic nervous system activation, and improve oxygen efficiency outcomes with direct downstream effects on cardiovascular health and cognitive resilience. The direction your ribs abandoned at 3 weeks old, before you had a face, before you had fingers, before you were anything more than a folding tube of cells, is still, right now, at this exact second, influencing how efficiently blood reaches your brain. Let's connect everything. It started with a 2-fingered experiment on your own chest, a tiny asymmetry in how your ribs expand that most people go their entire lives without noticing. That asymmetry wasn't a defect. It was the fossilized memory of an event that happened weeks after your conception, when a straight tube of cells looped itself into a heart, claimed the left side of your chest, and forced your entire rib cage, your diaphragm, and even your lungs to permanently reorganize around it. That reorganization didn't stop at your skeleton. It shaped the mechanical rhythm of your breathing, a rhythm that, with every single inhale and exhale, physically stimulates the vagus nerve, the primary regulator of your heart rate, your inflammation levels, your stress response, and the two-way communication line feeding information from your body directly into your brain. At the very top of that same rib cage sits one of the tightest bottlenecks in human anatomy, the thoracic outlet, where nerves and blood vessels destined for your brain and your arms squeeze through a gap that modern posture is actively narrowing, millimeter by millimeter, hour by hour, desk job by desk job. And as you age, the cartilage holding your rib cage together slowly hardens, compounding whatever asymmetry you started with, reducing your lung capacity, weakening your vagal tone, and quietly contributing to the same inflammatory, cardiovascular, and cognitive decline that researchers now recognize as central to aging itself. One structure, one subtle, lifelong asymmetry, connected to your heart's position, your lung capacity, your nervous system's master regulatory nerve, the blood supply to your brain, your inflammation levels, and the biological trajectory of your entire aging process. You didn't choose the direction your ribs abandoned. That decision was made before you had a name, before you had a face, folded into existence by a tube of cells looping itself into the organ that would keep you alive for the rest of your life. But here's what you do control: how you breathe, how you sit, how often you let that asymmetry compound in silence versus how often you counteract it with posture, with deep diaphragmatic breathing, with simple daily movement that keeps that ancient bottleneck at the top of your chest just a little more open. The next time you take a breath, you won't just be getting oxygen. You'll feel the ghost of a decision made 3 weeks after you were conceived, still shaping your heart, your brain, and how long and how well you get to live inside both of them. If this kind of hidden connection inside your own body fascinates you, the way one overlooked structure quietly controls systems you never thought were related, that's exactly what we dig into every single week here on Feynman Explore. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and next time your body does something ordinary, a breath, a heartbeat, a stretch, you'll already be asking the question we love asking here. What is this really connected to? We'll see you in the next one.